Welcome to Aither Insights, your go-to source for the best market analyses on important regulations and topics in the environmental markets. I'm Jack.
And I'm Jess. It's great to be here.
And we're ready to bring you another crucial conversation, really designed to help you quickly cut through the noise and get straight to the core insights you need.
That's exactly the plan.
Absolutely. So today, we're diving into the recently released 2025 State of the EU Emissions Trading System, the EU ETS report.
Right.
This is a really comprehensive report, a snapshot from April 2025 using 2024 data. And it basically assesses whether the EU ETS is truly, fit for purpose.
Fit for purpose, yeah.
It looks at environmental delivery, those complex socioeconomic impacts, and critically, how the market itself is actually functioning, especially, amidst all this global volatility. We've got quite a lot to unpack here, particularly around the system's big shift in focus, moving from mainly the power sector towards industry now.
Yeah, and the challenges that come with that.
Right.
And, this isn't just some run-of-the-mill report. It's a really deep assessment compiled by the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition, ERCST.
ERCST.
And they worked with some major players, too, like Compass Lexicon, Bloomberg NEF, the Weidner Center. Their findings give us these critical insights into the ETS right when it's facing this complex economic and political moment.
Definitely.
So for you listening, we'll be pulling out the most important bits, those nuggets of knowledge from all their extensive work today.
Okay, let's get into it then. The report kicks off highlighting this volatile economic and political landscape in 2024. So given that backdrop, how did the EU ETS actually perform on the environmental side? And what's the bigger picture for, say, European industrial competitiveness?
Yeah, that's the crucial starting point, isn't it? So in 2024, the EU ETS saw a 4.8% emissions reduction.
Okay, 4.8%.
Now, maybe that doesn't sound quite as dramatic as the, 16% drop the year before?
Right, that was huge, but linked to the energy crisis mostly.
Exactly. That was heavily influenced by the 2022 energy crisis. But, considering the economic headwinds, the ongoing energy challenges, almost 5% reduction is still, that's a solid step forward. And what's truly remarkable, maybe even a bit surprising, is that over 50% of that ambitious 62% Phase 4 target for 2030, it's already been achieved.
Wow, okay. Over half the 2030 target already met. That sounds, incredibly successful on the surface.
It does.
But you mentioned the power sector was the main driver. Does this success kind of mask a bigger challenge coming up for industry? Or, maybe it even suggests those original targets weren't quite ambitious enough if we're hitting them this fast?
That's a really sharp question, and it gets right to the heart of what the report is finding.
Okay.
So, yes, the power sector has been the engine here, rapidly shifting to renewables. But the report clearly notes that industrial reductions, they're more of a mixed bag.
A mixed bag? How so?
Well, a significant chunk of those reductions actually stem from lower production output, due to economic pressures rather than just purely from efficiency gains or deep decarbonization efforts.
All right, so less activity, not necessarily cleaner activity across the board.
Precisely. And this really underlines your point. The focus is clearly and increasingly shifting towards industrial decarbonization.
Which is a whole different ballgame.
Exactly. It presents a whole new set of complex challenges for the ETS. Needs different strategies, much higher capital investment. The low-hanging fruit from the power sector transition, that's largely picked now.
So it's not just an environmental tool, then, the ETS. It's also become this massive economic engine for the green transition itself. The report mentions some pretty staggering financial figures. How is it delivering economically, particularly, funding mechanisms, competitiveness concerns?
Yeah, the financial side is fascinating. The sheer muscle the ETS has developed. In 2024, it proved to be this increasingly vital source of funding. Think about Phase 4. So that's 2021 to 2023. The system generated, wait for it, $112.8 billion in total revenue.
$112 billion, wow.
It's huge. And to put that in perspective, about $88 billion of that went straight into member states' national budgets.
Right.
And crucially, since June 2023, there's a new mandate. 100% of those revenues have to be spent on climate and energy activities.
So it's all ring-fenced now.
Exactly. It's not just a regulation anymore. It's a critical financial pipeline, really fueling Europe's green transition.
That is a colossal amount of capital going directly into climate action. Sounds like a powerful signal for long-term investment, doesn't it?
It really does.
So beyond the national budgets, what about those specific funds, like the Modernization Fund and the Innovation Fund? How are they chipping in, and where's that money actually going?
Good question. These funds are really targeted. The Modernization Fund, for instance, it's dispersed about 15.3 billion specifically to Central and Eastern European member states.
Okay, focus support there.
Yeah, Romania, Czechia, Poland, they're the main beneficiaries. Really crucial for helping those economies upgrade their energy systems, their industrial infrastructure.
Makes sense.
Then you've got the Innovation Fund, another key instrument really designed to de-risk those pioneering low-carbon technologies.
Right, the cutting edge stuff.
Exactly. It's allocated around 12 billion across, I think it's 207 projects since it started. Initially, we saw a lot of funding going into sectors like cement and lime. But the report highlights this growing shift now towards hydrogen projects.
Hydrogen.
Yeah, which really tells you where future industrial decarbonization efforts are starting to concentrate.
Okay. But all this funding and Europe's high carbon prices, that naturally leads back to those persistent worries about carbon leakage, right? The risk of companies just moving production somewhere with weaker climate rules. What's the report saying about how the EU is balancing this, especially with the new carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM?
That's the perennial dilemma, isn't it? The EU ETS definitely has the highest carbon prices globally, averaging, 70 down 5 cents per ton CO2 equivalent in 2024?
$70, yeah.
That's significantly higher than, say, the UK ETS at around $48, or California's system at about $35.
Big difference.
Huge difference. Creates a strong incentive to decarbonize, sure, but also a potential disadvantage competitively.
Right.
So the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, was specifically designed to tackle this. Put a carbon price on certain imports, level the playing field.
In theory.
In theory, yes. But the report notes it's still, it's an untested instrument. And a really significant finding from their stakeholder survey. 66% of respondents actually disagreed that the current mix of EU ETS and CBAM adequately addresses competitiveness concerns for EU industry.
66% disagreement. That's a huge red flag, isn't it?
It is.
What are the specific pain points there? Is it the admin burden of CBAM, its scope, or just that the economics for EU industries are still challenging despite CBAM, given those high carbon prices? What's the feeling?
It seems to be a bit of everything, really, a multifaceted concern. The report doesn't detail specific quotes, but the general vibe points to worries about the administrative complexity of CBAM.
Right, the paperwork.
Yeah, the potential for it to actually increase costs rather than just neutralize them, and whether its current scope really covers all the relevant sectors that might be at a risk of leakage.
Okay.
And there's that underlying concern, too, that even with CBAM, the sheer cost of deep industrial decarbonization inside the EU might just push some companies to cut output or disinvest rather than truly innovate.
So exporting jobs and emissions, not just products.
Potentially, yeah. It's such a delicate balancing act. You want to incentivize decarbonization, obviously, but you can't kill industrial competitiveness. And that survey data strongly suggests policymakers still have some work to do to build confidence in that balance.
Okay, so moving on to the regulatory side then. Given these economic realities and the push to decarbonize, what big regulatory shifts happened in 2024 within the ETS framework itself? And how are those changes affecting the market?
Yeah, 2024 was busy on that front. The big 2023 revision of the ETS directive, that triggered this whole cascade of updated secondary legislation last year.
Right, the follow-on rules.
Exactly. Affecting everything from the nitty-gritty of monitoring rules to how free allowances are handed out and, crucially, bringing the maritime sector in.
Oh, yes, shipping.
Yeah. So, for example, new rules now specify that some captured CO2 used in products might not need allowances surrendered for it, a significant one. And including shipping is expected to noticeably increase demand for EUAs, the allowances. That creates new market dynamics everyone has to adapt to.
Right, more demand coming online. That's a lot of moving parts just within the EPS.
Yeah.
But as you said, it doesn't operate in a vacuum, does it? Other big EU policies are tangled up with it. How do those broader policy interactions play out?
You're spot on. This is where it gets incredibly complex. We're seeing carbon pricing interact with this much wider array of climate, energy, industrial policies.
Like what?
Well, take the Carbon Removal Certification Framework, the CRCF, adopted in November 2024.
Right, for negative emissions.
Exactly. That's a huge step towards potentially including negative emissions in the EU ETS itself, which could fundamentally change supply and demand.
Wow, okay.
But all this increasing complexity, it sometimes affects market efficiency. And what's more, member states aren't just sitting back. They're rolling out their own substantial national aid policies for decarbonization, too.
All right, like Germany's subsidies.
Precisely. Germany approved that 18.8 billion package under the temporary crisis and transition framework. So it shows this multi-layered approach, but it also means businesses are navigating this kind of patchwork of rules and incentives across different countries.
That really paints a picture of a dynamic, maybe even slightly fragmented landscape.
Yeah.
So with all this change, all this uncertainty, how has the market itself actually been functioning? Has it been stable, turbulent?
It's fascinating, actually. Despite all these ongoing policy tweaks and the uncertainty, the market seemed, well, relatively unfazed in 2024.
Really?
Yeah. We saw overall improvements in market participation. That's usually a sign of confidence.
Right.
Traded volumes hit an impressive 9.7 billion EUAs. Liquidity stayed strong. Now, open interest that measures outstanding contracts can sometimes indicate sentiment. It did fall by 19%, lowest in over a decade, actually.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Hard to say for sure, but auction participation actually rose, which suggests different parts of the market are behaving differently. Financial players were likely driving a lot of that increased auction activity.
Okay.
So overall, the market seems to be absorbing these changes without, major panic or dislocations.
That's quite resilient, then, for the system to handle such big policy shifts. So with that in mind, what about prices? What's the analyst consensus look like for 2025 and beyond? What signal does that send?
Yeah, the report highlights a really strong consensus among analysts here. Carbon prices. They're projected to rebound in 2025.
Okay, rebound expected.
And widely expected to reach at least €120 per ton before 2030.
120. Wow.
Yeah, and that's not just a number, right? It's a powerful signal. It shows the market's long-term anticipation of future scarcity as that EU ETS cap keeps tightening, keeps decreasing steeply as planned.
Right, the shrinking supply.
Exactly. So for you listening, this is a clear, consistent signal for making those long-term investment decisions. If you're looking to decarbonize, future-proof your operations, you can pretty much factor in persistently high and likely rising carbon costs.
Creates a powerful economic case for action.
Absolutely. A strong incentive for innovation and efficiency.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit then to the global stage. How's the EU ETS interacting with other carbon markets, especially now the UK ETS has kind of gone its own way after Brexit? What are the implications there? Any movement on linking them?
Yeah, this divergence is a key point in the report. Initially, right after Brexit, UK allowances, UKAs, they actually traded at a premium to EUAs.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, but that trend completely flipped in 2023 and 2024. UKAs ended up trading like 25–35% lower than EUAs.
Why the big drop?
Mostly down to things like policy uncertainty within the UK and also reduced industrial activity there.
Yep.
What's interesting now is that there seems to be renewed momentum, especially with EU-UK summit talks, to actively consider linking the two systems again.
Linking is back on the table.
It seems so. The logic is clear, right? Linking could seriously cut costs and bureaucracy for businesses operating in both areas.
Makes sense.
And critically, it could help address those competitive implications by creating a more unified, larger carbon market.
Interesting. Okay, beyond the UK then, what about broader international links? Thinking about the Paris Agreement, Article 6, the idea of global carbon markets, trading credits. Where are we with that?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating space right now. At COP29, November 2024, there was a significant step forward, an agreement on the rulebook for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement.
Right, the rulebook was key.
Exactly, and it prioritizes removal credits. This basically opens the door for what they call ITMOs, internationally transferred mitigation outcomes.
ITMOs. Okay, so carbon credits moving between countries.
Essentially, yeah. Carbon credits generated in one country that another country can use to meet its climate targets. Now, the EU has historically been pretty cautious about linking its ETS to these kinds of international credit markets.
Understandably, perhaps, quality concerns and all that.
Right. But this new global framework means the EU will likely need to reassess its position. It's definitely a positive sign for the bigger picture, for global carbon pricing efforts evolving, could offer new ways to hit those ambitious climate goals.
Okay, so looking ahead then, what are the major reviews, the big discussions planned for the EU ETS itself in the next few years? What should listeners be keeping an eye on? And maybe more importantly, what do the actual stakeholders, the market players, think about where things are heading?
The policy horizon is definitely packed. The European Commission has a major review of the EU ETS scheduled for 2026.
2026, that's quite soon.
It is. And this review is critical. It includes potential tweaks to the Market Stability Reserve, the MSR.
Right, the supply adjustment mechanism.
Exactly. That thing that automatically adjusts allowance supply based on how many are floating around, helps prevent price crashes or huge surpluses. They'll also be looking closely at CBAM again.
Okay, what might change with CBAM?
Well, for example, a more stringent CBAM may be expanding its scope to cover new sectors that could accelerate the phase-out of free allowances for EU industries.
Faster phase-out.
Which would, in turn, intensify demand for EUAs and very likely push prices up further. That's a massive consideration for companies planning their long-term decarbonization path.
So the push for more ambition keeps going, but always with this balancing act with industry realities' competitiveness.
Precisely. That tension is always there.
What other expansions or innovations are being discussed for the ETS?
Well, there are active talks around integrating negative emissions like carbon capture and utilization, CCU, into the ETS, potentially by July 2026.
Okay, integrating removals, that's huge.
It would be. It would significantly impact EUA demand and how companies even think about their decarbonization strategies. Plus, sectors like municipal waste installations are being brought in.
Right.
And the coverage for aviation and maritime transport is being expanded. The goal seems to be consistency, broadening the system's reach, making sure more emissions sources face that carbon price.
Covering more ground?
Yeah, it really shows the EU's commitment to making the ETS the central pillar of its climate policy.
And that market sentiment survey from 2025, that gives us a really crucial look into how these stakeholders, the actual businesses operating in the system, feel about all these changes, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's invaluable, like a direct line into the market's thinking.
So what were the key takeaways?
Okay, so the survey shows strong confidence. 83% believe in the ETS's decarbonization signals out to 2030.
Okay, high confidence short term.
But, and this is striking, 94% are urging scrutiny of what happens post-2030.
Uncertainty beyond 2030.
Massive desire for clarity and ambition beyond the current decade. Interestingly, while 73% disagreed that CBAM should be delayed.
So they want to implement it.
Yes, but that significant 66% also felt that the current EU ETS plus CBAM combo doesn't adequately address competitiveness and carbon leakage.
So the tension again. They want CBAM, but think it needs work.
Exactly. It needs refinement. And what's more, there's growing support, really strong support, for bringing in carbon removals early at the domestic level, 75% agreement there.
Okay.
And also for an international link via international credits, 62% agreement to help meet climate goals.
Interesting. So openness to new tools.
Definitely. These findings really underscore this ongoing evolution and the critical decisions facing policymakers and everyone involved. It tells you there's a clear appetite for new mechanisms to tackle that next, harder phase of decarbonization.
Well, that was a truly insightful Aither insight into the 2025 state of the EU ETS. It's abundantly clear, isn't it? While the system's made huge environmental strides, especially with power.
Yeah, definitely.
This pivot to industrial decarbonization and the whole complex dance with international policies, competitiveness, that's absolutely going to define its future.
Without a doubt. The ongoing reviews, the push for international links, that strong market feeling wanting long-term predictability, it all points to a really dynamic, really demanding period ahead for environmental markets. Those critical questions, balancing ambition with industrial reality, how emerging tech like carbon removals fits in, they're going to be central themes for years to come.
Indeed. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? As the EU ETS keeps evolving towards net zero, what truly innovative, maybe even unexpected solutions will actually emerge from industry itself to meet these escalating demands? How will they transform?
A fascinating thought to end on. And, if you are looking for expert guidance navigating these complex, fast-moving environmental markets, the Aither Group is here to help.
Right.
With 15 years deep in carbon markets, Aither offers comprehensive insights, ETS price outlooks, regulatory timelines, in-depth market analysis, how all these different policies interact.
All crucial stuff.
Absolutely. Our services are really designed to help you understand and confidently navigate this whole evolving landscape.
So for more information on how Aither Group can support your organization's needs in environmental markets, do visit our website. Thank you so much for joining us on Aither Insights. I'm Jack.
And I'm Jess. We look forward to bringing you more in-depth analyses very soon.